What's up, fellas? In today's video, I'm bringing back the What's Next series for the 2021 NBA offseason, and we're going to begin with the Orlando Magic, which might seem a little bit odd to you, but I really like what the Magic did this season with their roster and how it sets them up for this 2021 offseason. So we're going to look back at their year and then how it's going to impact their offseason, kind of preview what they're going to be doing this summer. If you don't know this series, by the way, I'm going to do this for every single team. I'm going to talk about some trade stuff that could possibly go down with them, where their payroll is at, what they could potentially be doing in the draft, just entire offseason previews for every single team in the league, again, beginning with the Orlando Magic. If that sounds like something that you would be interested in, then consider subscribing. I upload every single day on this channel. It's the most consistent NBA content on YouTube. If you enjoy the video, leave a like rating on it, and you can check me out at various socials and a link down in the description below. Now, as I said, some of you are probably surprised that the first team in this series is the Orlando Magic, because their season certainly did not go as planned. After making the playoffs 2 seasons in a row, they had one of the worst records in the entire league this year, and they traded away a lot of their big name players, on their roster. Evan Fournier and Gordon, Nikola Vucevic, all of which are no longer on the team. And it started off not very well at all. They were already missing Jonathan Isaac due to a knee injury in the bubble from last year. And then Markelle Fultz tears his ACL after just 8 games, after 8 promising games at the beginning of this season. And relatively quickly, by the time we got to the trade deadline, the Magic pivoted and they realized that they needed to be looking more towards the future and trying to build around some of the younger players on the roster and setting themselves up well moving forward. And that is exactly what they did. So even though their season didn't go as planned, they wanted to make the playoffs, and that has kind of been a consistent goal for them over the last handful of seasons. I think they did a really good job of recognizing the needs of this roster and going in a different direction, and that allowed for some development and a little bit clearer picture of what some of these players are going to look like moving forward, some of the younger guys on this roster. There's a handful of different players, that are 25, 26 or younger that had some bright spots at times here for Orlando. RJ Hampton is a guy that came over, had some nice moments. Cole Anthony as a rookie showed some good scoring ability as well. Wendell Carter Jr. is a guy that I can't seem to give up on that came over in the Nikola Vucevic trade. Dwayne Bacon was a pretty solid scorer for them. Even guys like Mo Bamba, Chuma Okeke had some moments, and then even Gary Harris there as well. Even though his stats don't look great in his time in Orlando, could always develop back into an asset as he is an expiring contract for the 2022 offseason. So even though things didn't go well from an injury perspective, and they certainly expected to have a better record than they did this year, there's a handful of different young guys you can potentially look to build around, not to mention some of the draft picks that they're going to be having not only this year, but moving forward as well. They're going to really allow them to raise the ceiling of this group. Now, as you look at the payroll for the Magic, they have the big expiring contract of Otto Porter coming off that they got in that Bulls trade, and about $12 million in projected salary cap space as of right now. But after they sign their presumably high picks to rookie deals, they probably really won't have any cap space at all, or whatever they will have will be pretty minimal, which is unfortunate, because one of the nice paths for them this offseason would be to go out and try and get one more building block in restricted free agency. There's a lot of different players, younger players, that still have a good amount of potential that are going to be entering restricted free agency this offseason. Guys like Jared Allen, Lauri Markkanen, Alonzo Ball, and it would have been nice for the Magic to be able to throw a $15 million a year deal at one of those guys to add to their young core. Unfortunately, that's not an option for them. However, it's really not the end of the world, because one of the reasons they don't have that salary cap space is because they smartly went ahead and tried to re-sign some younger players on their roster. Now, I was critical of these 2 deals at the time, but after they've now shifted their roster, the Markelle Fultz and the Jonathan Isaac contract extensions start to make a bit more sense if you're not a team that's pushing for the playoffs on a consistent basis. Paying Fultz and Isaac $17+ million a year over the next couple of years each could turn out to be bargains if they stay healthy. Fultz had a couple of really, really good games, and it looked like he was starting to put it together. He's starting to get healthier, starting to figure out what it's going to take for him to be a productive NBA player. And it wasn't just a statistics thing. There was something visually you could start to see click from Markelle Fultz, and unfortunately that was cut short by injury. And Isaac is one of my favorite players in the league prior to injuring his knee, as one of the better defensive players in the entire league with incredible versatility. And if he can continue to develop the offensive part of his game as well, these two guys could absolutely be bargains on these deals. Now, one of the reasons I was critical at the time was because it really handicapped what they could do moving forward when they had some of those bigger contracts, Aaron Gordon and Nikola Vucevic, on the roster, and you didn't know if those guys were going to be healthy enough to fulfill the promise of those deals. But since nobody else on the roster is really going to be taking up that much money anyway, it makes sense to have these two guys here and then potentially build with them moving forward. So not having salary cap space is not the end of the world for the Magic this offseason, given the fact that they have some draft picks that we'll be talking about here in a little bit. But also, there aren't really any big contract extensions on the horizon unless they want to re-sign someone like Gary Harris, Mo Bamba, or Wendell Carter Jr. to an extension next offseason. There aren't really any big numbers you have to anticipate here moving forward for Orlando. And if you do end up having to give someone a big number, it would be a benefit because someone will have come out of nowhere and had a really, really good season next year. Now, as we look beyond free agency into the NBA draft, this is where things could really be a game changer for Orlando, as they have their own pick, which as of the recording of this video has tied for the third best lottery odds in this entire draft with Oklahoma City, and they hold the rights to Chicago's first round pick this year as well as a result of the Vucevic trade, which as of the recording of this video is at right around the 8th best lottery odds in this draft. Now, the only way that they would lose that pick is if it landed in the top 4, which is a possibility, but still, having two picks with those good lottery odds going into this draft is a complete game changer for Orlando, because what that allows them to do is put all these other young players that they have on the roster to the side and say, we don't know what these guys are going to be. We don't know if Fultz is going to be healthy. We don't know if Jonathan Isaac is going to be healthy. We don't know what RJ Hampton and Mo Bamba, these guys are going to end up becoming. But what we do know is we have two chances to potentially get really, really good players in this class, and one chance to potentially get a franchise-altering and changing player at the top of this class, which presumably by most draft projections I've seen is going to be Cade Cunningham or Mobley there at the top of this class, right? So most people see this as like a top 5, maybe stretch it to a top 6 class, and Orlando has the opportunity of getting a pretty high chance of getting one of those guys, and maybe even the opportunity to get 2 of them as well. And what that allows them to do is establish those guys as true franchise cornerstones, because the only other 2 players you could really make a case for that being on this Orlando roster would be Isaac or Fultz, and neither of them are healthy. So it would be nice to have a couple of other chances to really count on in terms of players becoming really, really good assets down the road. Now, there's no guarantee, of course, that they're going to end up even keeping the Chicago pick. There's no guarantee that they're going to get any higher than the 3rd pick, and they could even slide down with their own selection. But the point is, prior to this offseason and coming into this year for Orlando, they were going to be stuck in the middle. They were going to be picking the way they have been over the last couple of seasons, where they're somewhere between that 8th and 9th to 12th and 13th spot in the draft, and that wasn't really getting them anywhere. You have to get pretty lucky. You have to be really good at developing young players in order to really get a ton of value out of those middle draft pick slots, and that's just not something that Orlando has shown to be good at over the last couple of seasons. So being able to tank without tanking here, right, where you do have some injuries to some guys and you realize the season's not going the way you want it to, you trade Vucevic, you trade Gordon for value to raise the value of your own pick, but then also get extra assets, whether that be young players or this extra draft pick from Chicago, in addition to Chicago's 2023 pick as well, which is critical here as well. Really sets Orlando up extremely, extremely well. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about them today, and one of the reasons why I really like what they're going to potentially be doing this offseason with this roster. Now, in terms of who or what positions to potentially target in this draft, they can't really afford to be picky. It pretty much is just any position is available for them. Like I said, only Isaac and Fultz have really established themselves as like franchise cornerstone pieces. And with their health being up in the air, you can't really rule out a big-time player at a specific position just because you have Fultz or Isaac on the roster. Ideally, you would be fitting your draft needs around what your roster needs are. But for Orlando, there aren't really any glaring needs outside of ceiling raising players, and that is what I would target. The ideal situation, of course, would be that they would end up with Cade Cunningham. I think that would be a super interesting destination for him, because if he's going to a team that was bad this year but isn't technically a bad roster overall, assuming that they're healthy, and him alongside Fultz and Isaac and whoever else they potentially pick in the first round of this draft could be really, really interesting and really, really exciting as well, with then the added asset of having that 2023 pick down the road as well to potentially use in some trade scenarios. So if I'm targeting a huge area of improvement for Orlando this offseason, it's going to be, of course, in the draft. They can either get the first pick in this draft, get a top 3 pick in this draft, get a franchise-changing player, and have that extra pick floating around out there as well, somewhere within that top 10, or The possibility also exists that maybe they end up with the 4th pick and the 6th pick and then package those two together to go up and get one really big time player if that is an option that they want to explore. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't some options here for them via trade as well. There are some really interesting players on this Orlando roster that might not be part of the long-term plans, but could be an asset to another team either because of an expiring contract or because of value on the court. I've talked in the past about potential Terrence Ross trades. He's under contract for the next couple of seasons, but he's a guy that can really shoot the basketball, can score, and could provide some value to a particular team. And I would explore trading him this offseason before his value starts to decrease in a significant way as he is starting to get older. I'd rather get off that contract before someone else realizes that Terrence Ross is starting to get older, because I do think he does provide at least a little bit of value. So I would at least explore that option. Gary Harris is another guy that it would be really nice if he would develop, there in Orlando and become someone that they can count on moving forward. But considering they have Fultz, they have RJ Hampton, they could potentially end up with another guard in this draft. There's probably not going to be a lot of opportunity for a Gary Harris reclamation project here. So I would look at potentially trading him as well, in addition to the fact that he has an expiring contract for the 2022 offseason that could look nice to another team. And as I'm going to continue to point out, depending on what they do in this draft, they're going to have the opportunity to make a bigger trade down the road involving that 2023 Chicago pick. Now, we have no idea what that pick is going to end up becoming, but let's just say that a scenario exists in which they end up with a top 2 pick in this class. They end up with one of the 2 guys that everybody wants, Mobley or Cunningham, right? And then they end up with like the 6th or 7th pick, and that guy becomes something interesting, but he's more so of an asset than anything on the court, right? And you've got, let's say, Cunningham, Fultz, Isaac, those guys come back and are healthy. Maybe there's some Mobamba stuff going on, and you're looking for one more guy. You're looking for one more piece that you can bring in, a bit more of a proven player that still kind of fits the timeline. Someone becomes available via trade, and you go out and you make that move. You trade whoever you get with that 2nd pick in this class. You trade that 2023 Bulls pick as well, maybe throw in some other stuff, and you get another proven player. It's not going to be a superstar level guy. They're not going to want to come to Orlando, but if someone does become unhappy and potentially wants to end up somewhere else, the Magic are in position to step up and provide a pretty significant offer if that fits the timeline of their team. It's not all that likely of a scenario, given that smaller market teams like Orlando typically don't end up making those types of moves, even if they're in position to, just because of the limited interest in teams playing for them. But that could all change depending on how good Cade Cunningham is immediately if they do end up with him. So ultimately, for the first time in a long time, I think the future is pretty bright in Orlando. So at the end of the day, I love how Orlando has positioned themselves this offseason. Best case scenario, they end up with the 1st pick in this draft. They end up with someone like Cade Cunningham, or maybe the 2nd pick, they end up with someone like Mobley. And then they also end up with another pick within this top 10 as a result of that Bulls trade, which immediately, in my opinion, makes the Vucevic trade worth it. They get a couple of guys that really help them moving forward, a potentially franchise-altering player, in addition to someone else that could be interesting, along with all these other young guys that they're going to try and develop moving forward. And they have the opportunity to not only be one of those interesting young up-and-coming teams, but also probably won't be that great moving forward as well, potentially get another top 10 pick next year and then really start to build something, as they don't really have a ton of contract obligations in terms of re-signing guys going into next offseason. Worst case scenario, some of the salary cap stuff comes back to bite them, where they don't really have an opportunity to upgrade there the way that they want to. They don't get great lottery luck, but they still end up with 2 picks in the top 10 in this class, and they use both of those in order to start to build some kind of foundation, but they don't get anybody incredibly ceiling raising, and they have to count more on Fultz and Isaac to be able to do that. And the future is a bit more uncertain in terms of the overall direction of the roster. But at the end of the day, I'm excited about Orlando. I want to see what they do this offseason. I'm hoping they get some good lottery luck to really build around what they've done, because I think they've really needed to hit the reset button for a year and a half to 2 years now, and they were kind of forced into it, but I think ultimately they're going to be better off for it, and I'm really interested to see what the future of this team looks like moving forward in terms of what's next for the Magic. That is going to be the end of the first video in the What's Next series. I'm going to be doing a lot of these over the next couple of weeks and months. If you have suggestions for who you would like to see me do next in this series, leave a comment down below. I'll take a look and see what you guys are hoping to see from me over the next couple of episodes. With all those things said, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like rating on it, consider subscribing, and you can check me out at various socials and a Linktree link down in the description below. With those things said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your Sunday, and I will see you all next time.